you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
We have talked so much in this podcast about the emotional cost of having a medical career. What we have not yet talked about is who else is paying the price. You definitely don't want to miss this episode. The information that we will share can change your life. I know I wish I had this information several years ago. But before we start, we want to ask for your help. If you've been enjoying this podcast and if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, we would love it if you could, where it says go to show, scroll the way down and give us an honest rating and review. That is how we grow and how we get in front of more people like you. And we read every comment. We do. Now, without further ado, to our special guests, who are two physician spouses with different areas of expertise, both focused on helping medical families. So our first guest, Dr. Lisa Muehlenbein, hopefully I said your last name correctly, is a health psychologist who is passionate about helping physicians and their families thrive and not just survive. And Elizabeth Landry works with healthcare organizations to build community connection in a way that supports both physician well-being and long-term retention. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Joanna and I talk a lot about community, and I was wondering from your perspective, when did you realize that more resiliency wasn't the key and community was a big factor?
Yeah, I think for me, it was after I'm also a coach. And so after working with so many physician families and really learning more about, I've been through the process of residency and all those things, but really I didn't have to move. So learning through these residents that have been through moving for medicine and residency and medical school, that community really is what helps keep these folks going. It's really something that they're alone 80 plus hours a week generally, and if their spouse or partner can't be there, lots of times they're moving away from community, family, friends, careers. And if they have their own community when they move, then they are able to share the commonalities of life and medicine. And when you've got someone to share those challenges with, it just makes things so much easier. It's not resiliency. It's that you've got someone who's living the shared experience as you, and you've got someone who understands what you're going through. So that's really when I figured out that it's not just resiliency, because spouses and partners, I've always said, are some of the strongest, most independent folks that I know. It's not just resiliency because they are resilient. It's community that helps them integrate, that helps them thrive, that helps them really feel like they belong somewhere instead of they're just this lurker on the side as someone goes through their training or life in medicine.
I love that, Elizabeth. And how about you, Lisa? What do you think?
Well, for me, I've been married to my husband, who is a radiologist, for almost 30 years. And we started dating in residency, and we've been through many moves, 4 states. And for me, it was first something that I felt, but I couldn't actually name. I couldn't put my finger on it. All I knew was when I moved multiple times and I had no family nearby, and I didn't know anyone in the places that I was moving, I know I felt something lacking. And then fast forward to over 20 years later, I put my academic career on hold and gone back, and I was working on my PhD in health psychology, and I did it on physician burnout and the marital relationship from the spouse perspective. And during that process, 10 themes came up. But the 2 that specifically speak to your question are loneliness and sacrifice and loss. So these spouses experience the feeling of sacrifice and loss as they have followed the physician through multiple moves. They felt like the sacrifice came from moving away from family, perhaps giving up careers. In my case, it was both academic and professional. And, they feel lonely because they don't know anybody. They're starting over. And that feeling of loneliness and sacrifice and loss really highlight the need for community and how important community support is during this process, because physician families experience something unique and they have different complexities in their relationships than a traditional family. So when we talk about the feelings of loneliness and sacrifice and loss that happen from these multiple moves, because if you think about it, depending on when the spouse and the physician began their relationship, they may have moved for medical school, they may have moved for residency or fellowship and the first job. And most physicians don't stay in their first job very often or very long. So they may have moved multiple times. And when they move multiple times, they're restarting each and every time. And that's what makes what Elizabeth offers through the Med Commons so important in connecting physician families when they move.
And it almost reminds me of military families. Depending on when the couple got together. I was single till I found my first job, and that's when I met my husband. So he didn't go through all of that with me. But as you describe how many moves, and it's really, I think military spouses have built-in support, and it's still not easy. And there hasn't been that kind of support until, as you talked about, Elizabeth is now creating something to minimize that. And we'll hear more about that later.
I was trying to do the math in my head of the places I've been, and it hasn't been too bad, but you're right. I think that it's probably an exception, the longevity I've had in the place I used to be and location-wise. But you're right, that's a really good point, that the people I know and kind of restarting especially when you're already busy. And thinking about that, it kind of relates to what I wanted to ask I wanted to get your opinion on what is the emotional cost of constantly feeling like you have to carry a heavy load in a physician household?
Well, I think there's a huge invisible load that physician families experience, specifically physician spouses, because the spouse is alone a lot. We've got long work days. We have many nights on call. And that, coming back to the idea of feeling like a single parent when you're not. So when you think about it, there's a lot more that goes into your daily planning. You have to remember who has to go where. You have to remember what they need for those things. You have to think ahead. Oftentimes you have one person who's responsible for the school field trips and the parent-teacher conferences and attending all of the sporting events. And those things add up, they compound. And it's not that the physician doesn't want to be there, but it's just a part of the system that is not supportive of physician families. And when we look at physician families where the physician is female, statistics say that the physician still bears the majority of the domestic responsibility. So they have that load as well. You have your work and you have your home stuff. So that's what I found.
I think as far as the other thing, I completely agree with Lisa. I think the other thing that I want to bring up is, there's a whole other, not burden, I wouldn't say, but responsibility of physician spouses and partners to provide emotional support to someone about something they've never been through. So you've got, for example, I didn't grow up in medicine. My husband's emergency medicine, and there is this responsibility that I have to support him. He's been through COVID. He's been through a lot of challenges, whether it's someone who's passed away in the emergency room, someone that he's become close to, and treating it even just for a couple hours and something happens, and the burnout, the moral injury, all of those things, that's something that we are not trained to support, although we're the physician's number one supporter. Whether we're female or male, we're their number one cheerleader. And so you've got this huge responsibility to support the physician's well-being. And at the same time, you're struggling. But your struggles compared to someone who is experiencing burnout from, COVID and losing lives in the ER, and your struggles seem way less. So and Lisa did a great job in her dissertation about understanding the impact of burnout on physicians, spouses, and partners. So data wise, she could tell you statistically and data numbers how it impacts spouses and partners from her studies, but also just as being a physician, spouse, and partner, and all the hundreds of physicians, spouses, and partners that I've talked to over the years, we're not trained for this. And so we're, going about life like everyone else in this world, but then also we have to support this huge load for someone else when at the same time we feel like we need to downplay our feelings. So there's such a different dynamic to being the spouse and partner of a physician, that, part of the reason why Lisa and I both, do this is because others don't understand. My neighbor for ages was like, well, at least you're married to a doctor, and it's like, well, I don't know what that means because you really don't know what goes on in our house, meaning like there's lots of holidays missed, like lots of big events missed, lots of important events missed. And it's not as easy as everyone might perceive it to be.
I think that there's like an idealization of what life in medicine is, of being a doctor or in a doctor family, right? Or married to, and thank you for normalizing that. And I know I'm more friends of the wives of a lot of the male doctors I know. And for years, like I'm bringing back memories of sitting down with them and say, let me explain to you. And I'm old enough where even during residency, call was 24 hours. So you don't get a break. And then explaining if you're on call, it's like a 3-day event because the day before you have to rest. Then you're on call. So you're literally not there. And then the next day you're like, right, like there's nothing left in you. So it's like, it doesn't, right, like it's okay. And in trying to give them that perspective of the doctor and how difficult it is, but of course with a lot of empathy for all those days in a row, like you're saying, your partner is not there, even if they're physically there, and then having to go through all of that. So I hear you, not an easy thing, especially after so many years.
I've loved my conversations with both of you before this podcast recording because I've learned so much. And being a coach and being married for 25 years with my husband for 29, and I've been involved in our medical society, I'm thinking like, okay, what are we doing as the medical society to support the spouses instead of just including them in our dinners and our activities? But also I think, okay, if you're a spouse and married to a physician who's putting in sometimes 80 to 120 hours a week, depending on where they are and what their specialty is. And I'm a big fan of the 5 love languages. If your love language is as the spouse is quality time, your cup must be so empty. And how are you going to fill it? Or how are you not going to take that personally when you're married to a physician who has long hours? It's really hard to overcome that. I don't know if anybody else is such a fan of love languages, but as a coach, I'm always looking for tools that can help us better understand the people in our lives and our relationships. And that's one of the big reasons I think why Joanne and I both do coaching, and maybe for you, Elizabeth, too, is because I don't want the relationships that are related to medical careers suffering like my relationship did with my husband and my kids, because I didn't know what I know now. I wasn't getting coached. I wasn't a coach. And I don't want that ignorance or that lack of knowledge to continue, which is one of the reasons why we have this podcast and experts like yourselves on here.
It's funny, my husband and I actually had a conversation about the 5 love languages the other day. And I told him, I said, I think yours is acts of service. And he's like, yeah, I think so too. But we talked about the others and what mine were. And mine is definitely quality time. I like to receive quality time, and I like to also do acts of service. But for him to receive, he likes words of affirmation. And so it was a really interesting conversation. And not that we didn't know these things, but when you actually sit down and you talk with your partner about what those are and what that looks like, it makes things fall into place and it gives you a different perspective and understanding of the person you're in a relationship with.
Absolutely. And I think if you, as you were saying that, Lisa, if you take out like words of affirmation and there's a lot of resentment that goes on in physician families because of the time that they're not there and the workload that they can't carry at home. And there's a lot of, so I'm also quality time. And so if you don't feel like giving those words of affirmation because you're mad at the system, you're mad at because they don't have quality time, you're resentful of them. It becomes a big loop of you know, I'm 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 not mad at you, but I'm mad at the system, but I'm taking it out on you. And which is unfortunate, but it is how it works. And so if you don't have anybody else to have those conversations with, like we're sitting here having today, if you don't have anybody else to have those conversations with, and if you don't have anybody else to understand that, okay, this is normal, or maybe like what has worked out for another family where they've gotten through something that maybe you're struggling with now, then you feel alone, resentment builds. It just becomes something that eventually is going to burst. And what Lisa and I are both trying to do, and I know what you all are trying to do with your podcast, is just really educate people on how we can get past this and become better individuals, better physicians, better spouses and partners. So
Well, and I want to expand on that. I know I received 2 copies of the 5 Love Languages book when my husband and I got married. Didn't read it for a very long time, maybe a decade and a half. And when I became a coach and started learning more about it, then I finally, checked to see what's my love language, what's my husband, what's my kids. And that awareness, and if you don't know about the love languages for our listener, the 5 are acts of service, quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, and what's the 5th one?
Acts of service. Oh, physical touch.
And so in my family, everybody has a different one, a different primary love language. And the reason I found it so powerful is that if my husband's love language is physical touch, which that's one of his primaries, and mine is acts of service, I'm going to show him my love by doing something for him. And what he wants is a hug or a hand on his shoulder. And so when you learn the love language of those that you love, then you can speak in their language and it will be less energy and better received than putting your efforts into speaking the wrong language to them. And it doesn't mean anything because they need their cup full first with their primary love language. So my daughter was, I always joke around, doomed from the beginning because she was born as a twin with me as her mom, who was never home as a leader in medicine. And her primary love language is quality time. And I didn't know that until she was in her early teens. And I wish I had, because it explains so much of her problems with having me as her mom. And I wish I would have better understood it. And again, that's why I love these conversations, because if you don't know the 5 love languages, listener, please go out and learn about it and find out how that might be impacting your relationships and how much easier it is for you to improve those relationships, even with less time and effort, just by having that awareness. So that also, you've touched on these areas, Lisa and Elizabeth, about this isolation. I heard that theme coming up over and over again. And so help our listener understand, why do physician families feel so isolated, even when they might be surrounded by other people?
That's a great question, Erin. And I'm reminded of something that Elizabeth mentioned earlier about the comments that come from some people, like, at least you're married to a doctor, for example. That was something that came up in the theme of my research as feeling misunderstood. So when you combine that feeling of being misunderstood, another comment is like, oh, you're married to a doctor, so you must have a ton of money. You must be rolling in the dough. But they don't see $400,000 in medical school debt. They don't see the loneliness that is on the back end because you feel like a single parent because the physician is at work all the time and on call and spending their time with other people's families and not with your own. But what that brings us to is where Elizabeth mentioned earlier about the resentment. So there is that resentment, but at the same time, another theme in the research was pride in their service. So these two things that are contrary are existing at the same time. So you're feeling all your feelings, but yet your pride comes out when you know that they're doing a good thing and they're helping somebody. So, for example, one of the spouses that I interviewed shared with me that she was feeling super frustrated and they were kind of in a rough patch and they went out to dinner. And when they were out to dinner, a patient came up to the table and gave a wonderful compliment about the physician to the spouse, saying, that the physician had cared for them so well and that they were so grateful for how they received that care. And the spouses felt that, because this kept coming up, this was a theme that kept coming up over and over again. So they felt that, yes, I'm feeling resentful and feeling lonely. I feel like a single parent because the physician is working all these hours. But yet, on the flip side of that, they also feel a pride in the physician's service, knowing that they are doing good for someone else's family and they're possibly saving someone's life. And so it almost, in an odd way, makes it okay. And so those things all come together in that question.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. I think I'm actually just picturing someone sitting there and saying that to my husband and thinking, okay, at the same time, I'm happy for this person and I'm happy and I'm proud of this person, but what's happening, at home is they come home and they're exhausted. And like Dr. Joanne, you were mentioning, you're explaining a 3-day, one night shift is 3 days. Well, during that 3 days, not only are you alone, but you're navigating their mood too. And you're navigating. So during that time that they might have saved someone during a night shift, then you've been navigating a mood for 3 days. And so, and being alone and it's that lonely feeling is you can't go to your neighbor and talk to them about it because they don't understand. And you can't voice how you feel because you're proud of them. And it's almost like, I shouldn't feel this way. So I shouldn't feel this way. And I just need to mask how I feel because it's not valid, which is really tough. It's very lonely. The other thing that when you talked about loneliness is these physician families move for medicine, and over 80% of medical programs do not have support for that physician family when they move. And so they are left to navigate this whole training, if they're in training or attending, then they're left to navigate this by themselves. And not only are they navigating their own emotional weight, but they're also navigating the weight of the family and the family move if there's children. They're managing most of the time. If you talk to any locum scheduler or any sort of scheduler or someone in benefits, it's they're talking to the spouse or partner generally. They're not really talking to the physician. They're talking to the spouse or partner who's coordinating it. And they're just trying to find their way at the same time. So if you've got medical programs that aren't supporting the physician family when they move, and they've got a lonely, unwell physician, spouse, or partner at home who's supposed to be providing support to that physician so they can do their jobs. And that physician is then at work worried about the spouse or partner at home and how lonely, how upset they are, how they can't spend enough time with them, what they need at home, what they aren't doing at home. And so there's this whole, it's not just loneliness, there's this whole trickle-down effect of what happens during a move is not just about the physician, it's about the whole physician, which if you're looking at the physician and physician well-being in a holistic way, that also includes the family. So although it's not inside the hospital doors, it affects things inside the hospital doors. And so that's really where Lisa and I are coming from is if you're going to talk about the health of a physician, then you really have to talk about everything that comes with the physician too. And we can't control anything that happens outside the hospital doors isn't a thing anymore because they can't.
So, Elizabeth, this opens the door to what you have been working on. And we had an in-depth conversation about this a couple of weeks ago. And I'm so excited as someone, again, who works with my local medical society and with statewide medical organizations helping with the mental health with physicians. And you have a complete program that you've developed. Would you mind sharing that with our listeners so they're aware?
Absolutely. So it's really three-pronged. The first is we've created a website called the Med Commons, and that is a place for resources for physician families as they move through life and medicine. So we've really tried to make the Med Commons a go-to place to find what physician families need during their life in medicine. So it's articles, resources, guides, those are all included in the Med Commons on the Med Commons website, and that's free. Anyone can access that. Within the Med Commons is our second prong is how we help healthcare systems. So we help healthcare systems really understand how physician families impact physician well-being, and whether that is we provide, different guides for program directors, program coordinators to help integrate physician families into the well-being program. And then it leads me to the third portion of that is we also have for healthcare organizations, we have the Med Commons Circle. And what that is I call it a combination of Facebook, Nextdoor, and Bumble BFF, because really it's a place where physician families can join if they're moving across the United States, and they can find other physician families who live next to them. So in their local area, it's based on zip code, and they can find and connect with people in their area. They can find resources that are important to their journey. So for example, a healthcare system doesn't have to say, okay, these are great resources for you. Each healthcare program doesn't have to do that. I provide all of that in the Med Commons circles. So things like links to the White Coat Investor. We have links to contract folks. We have links to podcasts. We have links to coaching. So we have relocation guidance. We have links for books. We have resources for physician families within the Med Commons Circle. So really the Med Commons Circle is a low lift, high value offer for healthcare organizations to include physician families as part of their well-being program. So what we're really trying to do is support all physician families throughout the United States so their medical journeys can be easier than ours was. And also so we can have happier, healthier physicians and physician families.
That's impressive. That moves me, and I was feeling a little bit sad in what you guys were sharing before, feeling like you had to at times almost minimize how you were feeling because you're right, like you feel like you have to be present for what sounds worse. And I always say, just because someone else has it worse doesn't minimize your struggle. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation to say it out loud because it's different. It doesn't, we don't need to judge it in which one has it worse. But I hear you, and in sharing some of my personal story, like I've been on both sides of, I was previously married to another physician. And so, right, like that opens up another box. Would love to hear your opinion about it. And I had a similar experience because he is an interventional cardiologist, right? So he had the harder doctor job. And I was the psychiatrist, and I worked part-time part of the time. So, I was the one, even though as a physician as well, but then also carried the heavier load of the family. If someone had to go pick up the kid, suddenly, like, even now, co-parenting, it still happens. And even though the kids are older now, but in hearing you of, right, like wanting to keep a lot of that balance, and would love to hear your opinion if you guys have heard of what is it like in the two physician households.
Yeah. So I just want to point out the fact that dual physician households have different, unique, complex needs than a traditional male physician, female spouse. I mentioned earlier how when you have a female spouse a female physician with a non-medical spouse, that they still tend to take on the societal roles and the bulk of the domestic responsibilities. So when we look at dual physician households, the same thing still holds true. So let's make an assumption that we're talking about a female physician married to a male spouse who is also a physician. In that case, as you mentioned, the female physician still takes on the bulk of the domestic responsibilities. And one female physician that I spoke with was sharing with me, she was a pediatric anesthesiologist, and she was sharing with me two different stories. So one happened in her own household. She said, my daughter called me when I was in a case asking me if she could have fill in the blank. I can't remember what she said. It was like a snack or something. And she's like, why did you not ask your dad? And she's like, oh, he was watching TV. And then the other thing she told me was she was in a case and she was called by her daughter's school to come and get her because she was sick. But yet the dad, what makes his role more important? So it's very interesting, the dynamic there and what the social perception is of these roles and who they're going to call and who they feel is the appropriate parent to call at that time. But we also know that female physicians have a higher rate of burnout. They also have a higher rate of suicide. So that's something to keep in mind when we are looking at the female physician role. So
I'm also going to point out another statistic. And as a coach, I'm always watching for what are the risks that my clients have. I'm a female physician, now retired, but I am married to a non-physician. He's a firefighter medic, which I think gives him a better inside perspective, both of us, for his role than somebody maybe who worked at a bank or something. But women physicians, the last time I checked the statistics, they had about a 1.5 times higher divorce rate than male physicians age adjusted. And the only protective factor for the women physicians with their divorce rates was if they were married to another physician. And so that's something where if I'm coaching somebody who's married to a non-physician, I'm helping her understand your rate of divorce risk, which has so many downstream negative implications, whether it's financial, relational, co-parenting, all of that, than your male colleagues. So you need to have that on your radar. And another important statistic that I uncovered as I was trying to find helpful information was that male physicians who spend more than 40 hours a week at work have lower divorce rates. And I don't know any physicians, part or full-time, that work less than 40 hours a week. Female physicians who work more than 40 hours a week have higher divorce rates. So when you look at so many statistics for our audience, who is a lot of them are female physicians, there are so many negative barriers in your way. And that's why we want this information to put in front of you to say, how can you raise your awareness so you won't be caught up in the same traps that many of us were in your relationships, in your work, in your circumstances? Because if you're not aware, you can't change any of that.
And I have to say, like, again, talking about my personal experience, we were in med school together, and then we did couples match, and we went to the same residency. And it almost sounds like, I know it sounds very dramatic, but it's like trauma bonded. Like we just went through all of that together. And I think we didn't know better. So I think in a way that helped. And I think it helped in what you guys were saying, in the understanding of like how we could support each other, because we were doing it at the same time. And I knew enough, and this is what I used to say a lot, like I might not always be the priority in the moment, but I know that we are number one. Like even though his time might be spent, right, like he didn't always have a time to come home, and of course on call, and all of that. So, and that's a tough thing to really understand, that as a spouse. So, like, wait, of course, then other things happen, but it right. I remember COVID happened, and then we're both like crazy busy, like way busier than ever, and all the strings that puts in there. But like Erin was saying, understanding all these details, and it's so good for our audience, right? And again, thinking that a lot of our audience are the physicians, and hopefully it's also saying like, I wonder what the experience of my spouse is, right? And maybe challenge and just ask that question. I think if you're a physician and you have a partner, just ask, how is it for you being with me in my hours and my sense of responsibility, and that I sometimes come home and I'm like having to finish work, or all stressed out and tired, and knowing that it's difficult on in rewarding on both ends, but then having that empathy all around, and like you guys were saying, and improving the communication, it always is helpful.
And I also think, Joanne, we also, as the physicians who may be very neglectful of our spouses, can we get ourselves to a place where we can hear the answer? And I know Joanne's met my husband before. He's a very laid back guy, firefighter medic. He's been through a ton in his life and career. And because he's so quiet and understanding, I ignore him a lot. He's been ignored a lot in our 29-year marriage. And then every once in a while, out comes the tantrum like, can you please pay attention to me? I've been ignored all day. And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, the squeaky wheel gets the attention or whatever, however that, I think I said that all wrong. But anyway, if he's not, if you as the spouse are not expressing, I need some love and caring here, even though you're a physician, even though you have all this going on, you can't go without getting your cup filled up by your spouse for too long either, or you're not going to have a relationship.
I think that's a great point, because I've talked to a number of male physician spouses, and their cries for help are a little less. They internalize things more. And so it's a little bit more difficult to hear what they're going through, because they don't voice it. And so they get a little bit more quiet. And whereas for me, I have a hard time. I have a hard time not telling somebody how I feel. They just get a little bit more quiet. And so they're male spouses and partners of physicians. You're not going to hear the same. You will hear that they're lonely. I mean, we've had quite a few men join the community. It's not just women, it's men too. And so we have had quite a few men join, but their voices aren't going to be as loud as the female voices in general. That's what I've found.
And I'd like to add to this conversation as well that when we look at what physicians go through to get to the point where they're actually in practice, they've been through so much where you're not allowed to show emotion. You have to compartmentalize when there's an emergency, and you're going from one patient who just died to another patient where you're delivering their baby, perhaps. You cannot show emotion. You have to almost be non-human. And so we're asking them to be stoic and have this, no emotion demeanor. But then when they come home, we're expecting them to just take off that hat. No, it doesn't work that way. And they carry work home with them. So then when they get home, they have to be able to share with their spouse or partner what they're feeling, when they've just come from a place where they weren't allowed to do that. So being asked to flip that switch and being asked to then communicate their needs and wants to their partner, who, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, doesn't necessarily understand everything that they've been through that day. So we're expecting them to share this. And as you said, Erin, we have to be able to then accept what the spouse says in return. And I think that that is an issue that they may not be ready to receive. And so this is where communication is that bridge from the disconnection that is happening. So
That is
communication is key.
That is so well said, Lisa. I talk about that in my coaching all the time, that the doctor programming that we have that helps us get through the day and be functional, right? Like, we don't want to be all in our emotions if you're in the middle of a crisis or dealing with a complicated patient, but no one teaches us how to unwind that, how to turn it off, how to debrief. And then with time, we forget. Like, we're so numb, so disconnected. And getting back to even asking the question, like, how do I really feel? Like, it's becomes this big deal. It's so important.
I would love to add to that, Joanne. I love those key points, Lisa and Joanne, that you made. One of the words that I'm hearing themes of is discernment. And as a physician, again, how I show up at work may be exactly the opposite of how I need to show up at home. Can I relax and let my husband be the leader in the family and step out of that role and decrease my decision-making fatigue? But if I can't use discernment and step out of that role, then I'm just reinforcing my fatigue and my own resentment as a physician. But I didn't know how to get out of that role for so long. And for me, learning that, I couldn't get to a place where I was a better partner for my husband as a full-time physician and leader in medicine until I hired my first coach. And that was 20 years into my relationship. And there's, three of us are on our coaches on this call. And Lisa, you've got literally a PhD in physician relationships, which is amazing. And I would say that it's almost impossible to figure it out yourself. And that's why, whether it's a therapist, a coach, the right community, where you go find it. Again, doing it on your own is almost impossible because you've got a team of one and you just don't have any other people that understand it. And I love this conversation about the ability or inability to switch roles, and having three of us on this call who are all coaches, and Lisa, who is literally has a PhD in physician relationships. And the concern that I have is when we try to do this on our own in isolation, it's so hard. For my own journey, it was DIY 20 years into my medical relationship or my medical career before I hired my first coach. And that's when everything began to pivot. And whether it's a therapist, a coach, finding the right community, I would encourage our listener, this is not the thing to do DIY. And that is one of the reasons why we have such high suicide rates among physicians, both male and female, high mental health rates, high burnout rates, high turnover rates. And can we learn to, number one, lean into communities that are there to support us, but also creating communities like Elizabeth is creating in order to fix some of the problems and not just have this repeat. And so I'm wondering, for listeners who might feel disconnected, what's one small step they could take towards building community, whether you're the spouse or the physician? Lisa, maybe you could start.
Sure. So one of the things that worked for me personally is to seek out people who are also new in your area. You can go to the gym. You can find people, other parents, if you have children in school. You can join a medical alliance. Those are the counterparts to medical societies that exist on county levels for some counties, not all, unfortunately. On the state level, again, some states, but not all, and on the national level with the American Medical Association Alliance, which is the counterpart for the AMA. So we have physician members as well, but the primary audience is spouses. and they can offer support. Another group that I joined was, it was called Mothers and More. This was 20 some years ago. I don't even know if they're still around, but it was a mom's group. And that's where I met so many friends. I had young children. One was a baby and one was 1 year old. And so I had just moved, so I didn't know anybody. But you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And when I say that, I mean you have to go out and seek out this community because they all know each other already for the most part. They're not looking for new people. And my husband actually pointed that out to me when we had moved to South Carolina because I was like, I've met these people multiple times and they act like they have never met me before. And he's like, well, that's because they're not looking for new friends. You're the one that's looking for new friends. And so that can be really difficult. So I found moms groups. I looked in parent magazines that were local. And, you could go to the coffee shop and just strike up a conversation with someone that can be challenging to do. And of course, I'll let Elizabeth speak to the ability to find community in the Med Commons because that's a wonderful asset.
Yeah, so of course the Med Commons Circle, we do work with healthcare organizations to provide the Med Commons Circle as part of their well-being program, but also individuals can join. So we've made it a very low-cost way for physician families to find each other. It's $3.99 a month, so it's really easy. They can join on their own, and so they can do that. We didn't want to leave that in the hands of only healthcare organizations because we think that it empowers physician families to be able to find each other. So we do offer the Med Commons Circle as just an individual plan, and really our goal for that is for physician families to find each other. They can safely chat on there before they exchange any sort of information and then get out into their community. So go do all the fun things. If you're just going to be in a place for 3 years or 5 years or very limited amount of time, still, we want you to get out and enjoy your community because that's going to improve your mental health, your physical health, all of the things. So really, so I would first say the Med Commons Circle, but I'm a little bit biased. Other things that I would say is volunteering. Volunteering is a huge, it's a benefit to everyone. I mean, it makes your heart full. It helps other people. You find people, if you can volunteer for things that you're passionate about, then you can find people that have things in common with you. So I would say volunteering is one of my top ideas for getting out there and finding people. The other thing is sports. So if you can get out and play pickleball, if you can get out and join a volleyball league, a sand volleyball league, or get out and join a basketball league, even if you're a physician, then I know they have like little pickup games at recplexes and I would say sports, that is a great way to meet people and really get to know people because you're doing the same thing that someone else is doing. You need to communicate in there, and that way you can have some camaraderie with somebody where you are doing something that you enjoy. So those are probably my top 2 suggestions aside from just getting out there too. Like you have to, if you are in a new community, you just absolutely have to get out there. And even if you're just talking to the barista at the coffee shop, like this is suggested, go to the coffee shop, just talk to the barista. Get out there and talk to somebody. I know loneliness is not exclusive to spouses and partners. It is a big issue with physicians too, because your communications are work related. You're not, you've got the camaraderie of work, but it's not taking it outside of work all the time. So there is loneliness with physicians too. So I think that is something that must be nurtured in order for it to grow. And then if you nurture it, then you will feel the effects of and the benefits of community, especially within this loneliness epidemic.
Yes, I always say we heal in community. So what a beautiful reminder. And I hear hope as well. Right? It's easy to kind of externalize the blame and talk about what's going on and take it back to our own responsibility of what can I do even if it's in my own little circle to make me feel better and then help my family feel better and then spreading all the goodness, the ripple effect is when we're better, everyone around us benefits and the power of asking for help and right, in coaching and all those things. I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, we ask all our guests, as you know, the title of our podcast is Create Meaning in Medicine, Rewriting the Rules. So I would love to hear from you both of how are you helping rewrite the rules in medicine? Lisa.
So when I started on my dissertation, there were at that time no studies on how burnout affected the spouse. There was an abundance of research on how it affected the physician, but not how that crossed over and affected the spouse. We have some new data coming out, or that has also come out since then, but still very little. And so my hope is that I'm able to change what's happening by, number one, shining a light on the fact that this does happen and that it does affect the physician. And then when the physician is affected, it affects the organization and the patient. So it's fourfold. But on top of that, I'm hoping to add meaning by bringing the importance of physician families to the conversation around physician well-being programs.
So I'm working to change the meaning of physician well-being and the meaning in medicine by really widening the lens. So for a long time, well-being in medicine has focused mostly exclusively really on the individual physician, and whether it's resilience training or mindfulness or workflow optimization, all important, but really it's incomplete if you're looking at the whole physician. So I'm trying to help shift the conversation to include the physician family as part of the equation. So when the physician moves for training for a new role, their spouse or partner, we've talked about this, they leave career and community and their support system. And if that family struggles to find belonging, then it doesn't really stay contained at home. And it affects the stress levels, it affects the performance, retention, and really the stability of the healthcare organization. So by building an infrastructure for physician families through the MedCommons Circle, I'm really working to redefine well-being as something systemic and not just personal. So belonging really isn't a soft concept. It's a strategic driver of retention and sustainability in the healthcare organization. So that's how I'm working to change things.
We have covered so much in this episode, topics of loneliness in the medical family, isolation, also sharing feelings of feeling resentment, but also pride at the same time. And what I loved about this episode is we didn't just talk about the issues we're seeing and raising awareness. Lisa and Elizabeth both shared ways that we can take action to bring hope and possibility to the future of medicine, and that we can't keep doing things the same. And I know I have so many new ideas for how I can impact my own medical community in recognizing my own ignoring too much the family and spouses with the communities I'm in. And I see that you both will probably be impacting Joanne and my communities as we move forward, because I see so much momentum and collaboration that's possible when we share these ideas. So thank you so much for being such wise guests and bringing so much great information to our listener.
I hope that our audience is feeling as inspired and moved as I am. I can see how this episode is going to get shared because, again, it's like you were saying, Lisa, like this, we don't have enough information and enough resources for the spouses and the families and how important all this is. And would love to hear, I'm sure that people are curious, where can our audience find you if they want to connect with you all?
So you can find me all online at themedlifematrix.com, and you can find me on Instagram at the Medlife Matrix, and my podcast is the Medlife Support Podcast, and I also have an Instagram page for that, which is at the Medlife Support Podcast. So you can find me on all of those things as well as on LinkedIn.
And you can find me at themedcommons.com. I have an Instagram page also at themedcommons.com and LinkedIn or for Elizabeth Landry or the Med Commons.
And we'll make sure to add all of those links to our show notes so you can easily find them. And again, thank you so much. And with that, stay tuned. Our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.